out there, I want you to stand up really quick. Stand up wherever you are. If you're in your bed, if you're in your office, if you're driving in your car, don't stand up if you're driving. Stand up really quick. You know this happens when we're presenting in person, right? If you're in a big auditorium and that's what everybody says, stand up really quick. So I'm going to make you do it anyway. Stand up. And what I want you to say, I want you to repeat after me. I want you to say, my University of Kentucky Wildcat men's basketball team is going to be okay. Okay? Did everybody repeat that? Everybody, just as Aaron Rodgers said, we got to relax. Okay? You didn't know that it was a prerequisite for you to be a basketball fan to join our session today. But myself and Heather are huge basketball fans. I'm a big sports fan, so some of the references will be sports related as we move throughout our presentation for you today. So I want to thank the entire UK Women's Forum team. They have been great in all of this. It's been a lot of difficulties, technical difficulties, and the differences in planning this event this year. So I want to thank all of them for all of their hard work that they've done helping us get started with this thus far. So what are we going to talk about today? I want to slide through the slides. This is going to be what we like to call a more practical session, a lot more reality, a lot more theoretical applications versus research driven. While we are going to give you some theory, we are going to give you some research, we are actually going to give you a lot more practical experiences and practical explanations about our concepts that we're going to be talking about. Heather and I have been best friends for almost 20 years. I have to remind her of the time I'm like the female in the relationship and she's a dude because she forgets when our friend anniversary is and all of that stuff. So we've been best friends for almost 20 years. And we've got a lot of experiences that we are going to share with you on how our differences don't matter. They've actually helped us in our friendship and our personal lives and professional lives to where we are just amazing with each other. So what are we going to talk about today? The agenda you'll see, we're going to give brief introductions, talking about race and so as a social construct, a little bit of a political construct, but more about it being a social construct and what does that actually mean? We're going to then move into some theoretical models that are going to talk about race being a social construct and how those constructions actually lead to some of the communication breakdowns that we may have. Talk about active listening, and then we're going to actually give you some resolutions. We're going to tie it all up, wrap it up in a nice bow, and actually give you some practical resolutions to some of the things that we identify as being problems. All right. First and foremost, I want you to look here. Some of you may recognize what you see on the screen. This is very interesting because when we start to talk about, and I want to preface this by saying that a lot of our discussion is going to be white and black because that's what we are, right? I'm black, Heather's white. There are other discussions that'll happen when it comes to race relations, but the majority of our conversation is going to be about white and black. So on the screen, you'll see what is called a straightening comb. And then you'll see a relaxer, a black female getting a relaxer. So there's a funny story about the straightening comb. And it comes from a time that I was at Heather's house and we were getting ready to go out to a club. We were going to a club. Yes, we were. We were getting ready to go out. And it was at a point in time when I was actually natural. I didn't have a relaxer in my hair. So I took the straightening comb and I put it on her stove at her house. And she freaked out. She thought she was gonna have to call 911 because the straightening comb was burning in the kitchen and the smoke alarm went off and it was crazy. So that was our first conversation about some of the differences between black hair and white hair and why did I need to burn up her house in order for me to get fried, dyed, and laid to the side to go out that night when we were getting ready to go. So it was one of the first conversations that we talked about when it comes to the differences between black hair and white hair. The next one you'll see is the relaxer, or a perm as we call it sometimes. So I mentioned to Heather that I was going to get a perm and she was expecting me to come with big 1980s curls in my hair, when in fact we know that the difference between a black perm and a white perm is that a white perm is the curly one and a black perm is used to straighten the edges, if you will. So those were some of the initial conversations that we had as best friends when it comes to the differences between our hair texture. And I'm sure several of you out there have had those same conversations. Another quick conversation that I want to share with you was when we actually first met. And it was a conversation that she actually had with the owner of the company that we worked for. He was really concerned because she actually interviewed me and was good with hiring me, but he was really concerned about the fact that I was Black and whether I was going to be okay working in the realm of the situation that we were working in. He actually asked her, well, you know, she's Black. And she said to him, she's been Black all of her life, sir. I think she knows. So what was interesting about that conversation, the reason I share that with you is because number one, Heather felt comfortable enough. We had just met each other and she felt comfortable enough to share that conversation with me. That in itself built a level of trust just in an initial meeting with her, that she was comfortable enough to share that conversation with me. And we also, as we talked about it later in life, we realized that both of us interpreted that conversation differently. To me, that meant that he was doubting my skills because I was Black. He wasn't sure that I would be up for the job because I was Black. And Heather saw it a different way, and I'll let her, we'll slide right into her describing how she felt it about the conversation that happened with that individual when she hired me.
Yeah, what I thought he meant was, do you think she'll be okay because she's going to be probably the only Black person at this? He was sending her to a conference fairly quickly after starting. And he was like, do you think she'll be okay? Like, will they be nice to her? Will she be able to handle it if she's the only one there? So it was interesting when I talked to Lisa later how we saw that conversation differently. I perceived him to be saying something completely different than the way she took it. So that was really interesting to us. One other thing that I will add for the next slide, these are some pictures of Lisa and I over the years, but my kind of aha moment, as we've been calling these things, just kind of getting to know each other from different races, it's actually a series of moments with Lisa. She has taught me to be a better white person, which probably sounds funny. A Black woman taught a white woman how to be a better white woman, but it's really true. She's really moderate when it comes to racial issues and really any issue. And when we talk about it, she's able to see both sides fairly and doesn't get prejudiced one way or the other. And by being this way, she has shown me over time that I always tend to lean toward the minority being wronged or they need assistance, which I guess is my nature because I gravitated towards social work and victims advocacy. But she showed me that by doing that all the time, I was actually being enabling and even patronizing sometimes when my intent was to be empowering and respectful. So over time, just by being a friend and by gently challenging my thinking, she has really helped me not only become a better white person, but a better social worker and really an overall better human. So now that I've probably made her cry, we can go on to her next slide.
You know I don't cry. You know I don't cry. I want to point out, if you see the picture up there in the top corner, that was Heather's wedding reception. And you see me in the cowboy boots. Keep that in mind. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. My cowboy boots. That's another point that I will make to you a little bit later in the conversation. But we wanted to put these pictures in here for you, not just because it's all about us, but to let you know that we really and truly do love each other and we enjoy doing the same things together a lot of times. So we built that relationship because we've had honesty with each other and we're able to communicate openly. And again, we're going to talk about some of those things a little bit later in the session. So let's move into the kind of the meat and the potatoes of what the conversation is going to be about. What is a social construction? You've heard that many times, I'm sure. You hear it. If I'm a criminologist and a sociologist, so we talk about social construction. Let me give you an example of what a social construction would be. Think about money. You know, if I showed you a $50 bill, everyone would understand the value of that piece of paper. In society, we've given a construction to that piece of paper that it's worth $50, right? They're kind of adjectives or terms that we talk about. We talk about bravery, we talk about kindness. Those are things that if I say that to you, you completely understand what I'm talking about. You understand that bravery means that I'm going to go into that burning building and rescue somebody. You understand that if I'm kind, I'm going to pick up, well, I would say pick up an animal off the street, but that's not me. No, if it was a kid that was running down my street and looked lost or homeless, then my kindness would take care of that child. So a social construction is kind of an idea that we accept within society. And what I want you to think about is how we as society have constructed race to be a social construction. And the damage in us doing that is the fact that in some situations and instances, that has led to a tool of oppression, sometimes a tool that invigorates violence or creates violence. It oftentimes, based on just physical characteristics of individuals, it alludes to sometimes violence and oppression. And that's that social construction that we have come as a society to create around race. Over 100 years ago, W.B. Du Bois was talking about Black people and white people. And if we actually kept people in these segregated, separate groups, that we would ignore the entire scope of human diversity. And I think that is so still very important and poignant today for us to make that point, because if you understand race and that social construction of race, there's nothing biological about race. There's no cluster of genes, there's no specific gene that I can say that I have because I'm Black or that Heather has because she's white. But when we think about race, we know there are differences and we define those differences, right? Skin color is the main one. It really, and I'm going to say this, so if you're a person that says this, I want you to kind of start to think about it before you say it. I don't like when people say, I don't see skin color. I don't see color. You hear that all the time when people say that. I don't see color. Of course you see color. That's one of the first things you see when you see me is my color, right? But the key is what you do after you see my skin color. That's what makes the difference. So to say you don't see color, probably not true, because you see it when you see me. But the key is what you do after you see it, what you teach yourself to do after you see it. Thinking about the definitions of race again, hair texture, we talked about the hair, eye shape, sometimes even a person's name, we use that to define what race they are. Think about it. I'm not going to give any specific names because I don't want to offend anybody, but you know you've done it. I've done it. We've all done it. When you see a specific name, you automatically have a thought that comes to your mind. I want you to look at the next slide, because when we look at the US Census and how they define race, we know that's one place where individuals have to tell what race they are. And the census has done a better job over the years of allowing people to represent themselves more like who they are, whether that's providing them the option to select multiple races. There are things that they have progressed along as time has gone along. The key that I want you to see, and each slide, on the slides, you'll see each breakdown that's listed on the US Census. But what I want you to notice are the images that I've included in this slide. So each one of those images, those individuals look very similar. The color of their skin is very similar. Some of their features are very similar. But based on the definitions of race by the US Census, you see the countries, you see the areas that it allows for you to indicate a particular race if you're from that specific geographic region. All of these people kind of look similar. If you saw them on the street, you probably wouldn't know the difference between any of them. But you see the Egyptian young man, if he would check white because Egyptian is considered North Africa, okay? Ethiopian, she's Ethiopian. There's not much of a difference between those two, but she has to check Black because she's from Ethiopia. So you kind of get the point about race being that social construct and almost political to this extent when we're talking about the census and how we report our race and what the implications are from census data when it comes to federal funding and all of that stuff that we are not even going to get into, okay? So let's move on a little bit more and kind of hedge into the political standpoint of race. We know that we can't talk about race without talking about the transatlantic slave trade. We can't talk about race without talking about that. The map that you'll see indicates the Western African countries where the majority of Black Africans were sold into slavery from. What I want you to understand about those Western African countries, Senegal, Sierra Leone, Congo, those were some of the darkest Africans in that country. So for them to be systematically selected and sold into slavery says a lot about that years ago and what the decisions were, how the decisions were made as to who would be sold into slavery. Okay. Additionally, during around the same time in the, or actually in the 1800s, as we move forward, excuse me, we would see that there was research being conducted by several scientists. There's a particular scientist that I want you to take notes of and kind of do some research on your own about his research and how the methods that he used and the reasoning behind some of his research, it was all political, really and truly. Some of the methods that he used were flawed, but what his ultimate goal was to indicate that Caucasian individuals were intellectually more intelligent than Black or African individuals. So he did some skull research. He measured sizes of skulls, and the way he did that, again, if you look into his research, some of the techniques that he used, he put seeds and beans into skulls to actually measure them. And some of his findings were that the brain sizes were, the skull sizes were different between Caucasians and Africans had smaller skull sizes. So ultimately that research was actually used to maintain that status quo of slavery, racial division, hierarchy that existed within races. Okay. We want to make sure we are kind of moving on so we have enough time to get through everything. Another political aspect is apartheid that happened in South Africa. How did that affect us here in the United States? Well, during the Harry Truman administration, he actually chose not to protest what was going on in South Africa so we could keep an alliance with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. So that's kind of a political implication as to how it actually affected us here in the United States. But the apartheid was going on in South Africa, but because of political reasons, we had to make certain decisions to support or not to support what was actually going on across the seas. Okay. So I know I've talked a lot about skin color, and I've talked a lot about, eye size and names, and there's going to be some of you out there that are going to say, well, there are differences. There are genetic differences that we can see. So there aren't genetic differences, but a concept that I want you to really think about is epigenetics. So epi, what does epi mean? That Greek prefix that's placed on the beginning of genetics. Epi means in addition to, really, in addition to or on top of. So when we think about genetics, we're talking about epigenetics. So in addition to the actual DNA makeup, conditions in the environment or behaviors that individuals participate in may have an effect on how their genes work. Think about, it's often common to see sickle cell anemia in Black people, right? Sickle cell anemia is known to be a Black disease, if you will. Well, if you do some research about sickle cell anemia and the origins of that disease, it came from actually malaria. So there's a huge problem with malaria in Africa, right? So those are the reasons why some of those diseases end up being more prone to particular races, not because there's a genetic difference in our makeup, but because of the exposures. And what I forgot to mention to you about Morton's research was that, yes, he found that the skull size was different, but skull size and body size are incongruently related to each other, okay? So think about the environment as we talk about epigenetics. Think about behaviors that people participate in, the environment. That's what, in essence, causes changes that you may see that look on the outside look like, well, yeah, there's a difference between Black folks and white folks. Of course, there's a difference. Think about poverty levels. Think about stress levels when it comes to crime, criminal activity and crime rates, single parent families and single parent households. Those are the kind of things that will affect your genetics, not the fact that our race is different, okay? All right, and again, if you have questions about any of this, we'll talk about it at the end. I'm gonna turn it over to Heather because she's gonna start to talk about the attribution theory.
Okay, so we're hearing about all this social and political construct of race and how do we take this information and actually use it in our real lives and in our real relationships? How do we do that? Well, one way is by applying theories. And one theory that is a good one to use for this is attribution theory. And that involves interpreting events and how they relate to a person's behavior and their thinking. So in social psychology, attribution has two primary meanings. It looks at answering why, the why questions of someone's behavior and thinking, and it talks about inferring some particular trait onto that person as a result of their behavior. So I want you to keep in mind as we go through these that attribution theories, they try to explain how we evaluate someone's behavior and attribute a cause. They're not explaining the behavior, so they're not providing an insight into the real cause for the behavior. It's just talking about how we evaluate it. So the next slide. Oh, no, I think you skipped. Did you skip one? No, that's good. Okay. So no, you didn't. I'm sorry. So the two kind of founding fathers of attribution theory, Hyder in 58, Fritz Hyder, and Bernard Weiner in 74. Hyder looked at the internal versus external causes of a person's behavior, and then Weiner actually took it a step further, and he came up with a theoretical framework for it that a lot of research today still uses. So if we look a little closer at Hyder's theory on the next slide, he talks about two distinct features of how we attribute meaning. He talks about variance, which is the behaviors, and then he talks about invariance, which is the disposition or the motives, the intentions behind things. And Hyder felt like the invariants are the things that the observer actually uses to assign the perceived meaning to whatever behavior they're observing. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you're driving down the road and a car beside you swerves into your lane suddenly. If your reaction is, what a jerk, that guy is an idiot, then you're attributing an internal trait to this guy. He swerved into my lane, so he must be a jerk. Mm-hmm. Now, let's say there's a small child walking into the road and this guy swerves over to miss the child. So now your reaction might be, what an observant and careful driver he is to avoid hitting that child. So now you're attributing his behavior, which is the same behavior as before, to an external or a situational factor, avoiding a child in the road, instead of a personal character flaw of him just being a jerk. So I know that's a very simplified example, and things get much more complicated than that when we're trying to understand something as complex as race relations. But if every event or interaction that we have can be thought of in this simple way, that there may be an external factor influencing this person's behavior, I believe that it might slowly start to change some of our perceptions, and especially those kind of quick gut reaction type of responses that we tend to have. Maybe we'll have some hope of changing those and improving race relations as a whole. So moving on to Weiner's theory, he focused mostly on academics. And like I said, he went much deeper than Hyder because he developed a theoretical framework. For our purposes, I really just want to show you the basic kind of outline of what he talks about, which is observing the behavior, 1, 2, determining that it was deliberate, and 3, attributing it to either internal or external, which is what Hyder did. So, and I'm sorry I don't have this next part on my slide. I should have put it on there, but Weiner also talked about 3 causal dimensions that people use when they're trying to understand someone's behavior. And those are locus, which is the internal versus external, what we've already talked about. The second one is stability, whether that behavior is likely to happen again. So we think about that when we're observing someone's behavior. Are they likely to do that again? Have they done that in the past? And third, controllability, whether somebody would have been able to change the outcome if they had just expended more effort. So those are the things that Weiner says we consider when we're looking at someone's behavior and trying to determine a meaning behind it. There's quite a few other theorists who have contributed to attribution theory field. One in particular that I thought was relevant for race relations, Jones and Davis talked about social desirability. And basically what they said is we tend to attribute positive internal traits to someone who is displaying some behavior that we feel is desirable. So we go, look how intelligent he is when he's doing something or she's doing something that we think is a desirable social behavior. On the flip side, if they're doing something that's undesirable, then we attribute this internal trait to them as, gosh, he's really incompetent. How rude is he for behaving that way? So there's lots of other theories, like I said, but we don't have time to talk about all of them, so we'll just stick to these. But so if we start to apply these ideas directly to race relations, if you think about it, we actually use attribution theory as children. We don't know it, and our parents don't call it that, but a child who learns a bias early, such as all white people think they are better than us, or all black people end up on welfare, those adults, those children become adults who are substantially more prone to making faulty racial stereotypes than the children who don't get those early biases. So when we learn these biases early, they become a foundation for our interaction. So we grow up and we're trying to make sense of this complex world with complex situations and complex people and behaviors. And we start to infer people's motives and their intentions based on this biased foundation. So how do you think that goes? I think it's pretty evident from what's going on in our society now that we don't do it well a lot. So the name that we kind of give this inferring of people's motives and intentions is causal inference, defined as where one reasons to the conclusion that something is or is likely to be the cause of something else. And the way we learn about causal effects is through replication. So if we have these early biases instilled in us, and we have relatively little replication or interactions with the group of people that these biases are talking about, then how accurate do you think our causal inferences will even be? One example of this, I had an unpleasant interaction not too long ago on Facebook. I know, imagine that, an unpleasant interaction on Facebook, but it kind of is a good example of this. I had commented on a black friend's post. He had put up a post after one of the many shootings of a black man where he said, check on the black men in your life. We are not okay. So I responded, and my comment was something along the lines of, what can those of us who are not black or brown do better or differently to support you? How can I use my white privilege better? And what do black folks wish that white folks knew and actually understood and did that we're not doing? So those questions came from my heart, and I honestly wanted to know, and my hope was that it would become a good conversation. So the reaction from one of his friends, who was also black, and I only know that because I saw his picture, was shocking to me. He was so upset that I think his words were making black people do the heavy lifting. And he said basically that I should know, or I should just figure it out for myself. So his reaction, which was unexpected to me, made me immediately, like, I just withdrew from even wanting to engage any further on what I had hoped was going to be this great conversation, enlightening racial discussion. And I was really upset that he knew one thing about me, one thing, that I was a white female. And that's only because my friend said, my white friend posted this, what do you all think? So I felt slighted, like, hey, I'm one of the good guys. Yet he perceived my comment in a way that lumped me in with a lot of other white people that maybe he had had experiences with before. So I got lumped in because I'm white. So I had a real hard time with that for a couple days. And then finally I talked to Lisa about it. And of course, in her usual moderate way, she brought me back down to reality and made me participate in race relations again. But she really put it in perspective for me. And just having her do that was really, it was like a crossroads. It's like, from that, I could have gone this way, but instead I went this way. So it's really helpful to have someone in your life like that. So if causal effects are learned through replication, what problems do you foresee in race relations when we are attributing or inferring motivations and intentions to someone's behavior that we have very little meaningful contact or replication with? So Lisa's going to talk more about a model that we can use for better communication, and then we'll finish up with some common ways that racial trauma occurs and how we can work toward healing from that.
Heather, and we have got to really pay attention to our time. So I'm going to limit the amount of time that we spend talking about Berlow's communication model. The key points that I want you to understand when we're talking about effective communication are the source and the receiver, which is me to you, and the stuff that happens in between. If we're not on the same sheet of music, if we don't come from the same background, if we don't have the same ideals and thoughts about life in general. Sometimes there is a breakdown in communication, just like with the example that Heather shared with you. There's the stuff that's in between that doesn't happen that causes that breakdown in communication. If you have additional time to do additional research on your own, Berlow's communication model is an excellent tool for you to utilize when it comes to talking about effective communication. Making sure you listen. Also, start to pay attention to nonverbal cues, nonverbal communication, body language. If I'm sitting here like this, if you're talking to somebody and they're looking at you like this with their arms crossed, that typically means that they have shut you down and you don't have their ears anymore. Okay, so start to pay attention to nonverbal communication. Also be aware of your own emotions and how you manage those. My husband often tells me, fix your face. He says that to me all the time, fix your face, like, because my eyes and my face and my mouth, everything that I do here will indicate to you how I'm feeling if you say something. So be cognizant of those emotions and how you manage them, because they sometimes send off signals to people that is not what you're trying to send, okay? And it's also good and it's okay and it's perfectly fine for you to question somebody that you're communicating with. I didn't quite understand what you said. I didn't quite understand what you meant by that. Can you repeat that, please? It's fine to question what somebody's saying in order to make sure you are correctly understanding what it is that they've said to you and that you're receiving that message. When we talk about effective communication, we have to talk about active listening as well. Building rapport is one of the big things when it comes to actually being able to be a good listener. Build that rapport, have trust, allow someone to have trust in you so they will talk to you. It's interesting when Heather and I talk about our friendship a lot that we were able to build rapport for whatever reason. We were able to build rapport quickly. Some of it has to do with both of our backgrounds and how we were raised, and we've talked about that as well. But rapport building has a lot to do with active listening, which also leads to being able to have effective communications and conversations, especially when it comes to race relations. Okay, I'll fly right through these because I want to make sure we get enough time to talk about some of the important things that we feel are the most important kind of wrap up resolution points to the whole discussion.
Yeah.
So
when you might be able to skip these because we've really talked about this one.
Yeah, the incongruent understanding of the messages.
I think we've already talked about that.
Yeah, good deal. Good deal. So you want to move on. We can move on to talk about what actually happens when a breakdown occurs. I want to talk just a little bit really quickly about some microaggressions and give you some examples. I'm not going to sit here and read these to you on the screen, but you can see some examples of some great microaggressions that occur. When I look at you, I don't see color. I already talked about that one, right? Also, another one for me, really quick story, and this has happened to me multiple times when I get the whole my phone voice, when I use my phone voice, when people actually see me in person, when it's like, oh, like what's the O for? Well, I was expecting something different. What were you expecting? And I actually had a gentleman say, well, I was expecting a little short, petite white lady with blonde hair. I was like, wow, okay. And I also got another phone call. The previous job I worked at, I got a phone call from a man that he says, I was given your name, but I would like for you to sit on an interview panel for my agency. We're hiring a person and we'd like for you to sit on the interview panel. Okay, cool. I accepted the invitation, of course. And then he says, do you know any, he's like, I'm trying to really make sure we've got a diverse panel. Do you know any Black people? And I said, well, you're talking to one. And he just kind of stopped like, oh, okay, all right, cool. So I guess I got that block checked. That's exactly what he said on the phone. I'm like, yep, you do. So, but I want you, I mean, I know I laugh about those examples now, but think about how that affects people. Think about, I've always been told, you know, growing up, I was always not Black enough because I spoke a certain way and I made good grades and I didn't do this and I didn't do that. And then, of course, this skin doesn't come off when I get up in the morning, right? So I'm not Black enough here, and of course I'm not white. So where do we kind of end up? That's kind of a resolution that we want to end up. These are just some more microaggressions that you can see. You've heard that one, I'm sure. I'm not racist. I have several Black friends. Heather, don't you dare. Oh goodness. And again, these slides are going to be shared. So if you want to see you people, that's another one that you hear often. Being ignored at a store counter as attention is given to the white customer. I can't tell you how many times that's happened. And it gets to a point where stuff happens and you just kind of excuse it and overlook it, but that's not fixing anything, right? It's not helping anything if we don't actually address it and talk about it. So as Heather and I have told you, how we feel like we can start to fix and mend some of these incongruent conversations or ineffective methods of communication that happen, having open and honest conversations and being willing to listen. And what I also want to talk about really quickly is the flip side of that is if you're actually a victim or you feel like, I hate using the word victim because I never feel like I'm a victim of anything, but how do you handle that? First and foremost, for me personally, I don't subscribe to some of the colloquialisms that are going on nowadays about white space and, you know, this kind of space and safe space and all that kind of stuff. Any space that I'm in is my space. I don't care who is in that space. So some of the colloquialisms that go on nowadays, I feel like they sometimes increase the ineffective communication that we have. That's just personally me, my opinion. That's Lisa 101. No research on it. That's just me and my personal opinion. Also, when it comes to being a victim, I want you to learn how to and embrace who you are. Embrace your own truth. As I've mentioned many times, this doesn't come off. It's interesting to me. I teach at 2 HBCUs here in North Carolina. And when I tell my students that, number one, I'm a registered Republican, they're like, what? You can't be a registered Republican. And then when I tell them, I told you about the cowboy boots earlier, when I tell them I wear cowboy boots and I drive a pickup truck and I listen to country music, yeah, how'd that go over? You know, I'm from Kentucky, so what else can I say? But the fact that I'm just me and who I am. And I don't allow anybody to write my story, to write my narrative. I like to do that myself. I like to advocate and speak for myself, and I challenge each and every one of you to find that own self-advocacy. If statistics were true, if I allowed other people to write my story for me, I was a pregnant 17-year-old senior in high school. If I allowed statistics and other people to write my story, I would be on welfare with 6 kids, and who knows where my kids would be at this point. But instead, I had family, I had a lot of influences that helped me propel to that next level. So, you know, fast forward 20 some odd years later, myself and my son that I had when I was 17 years old, he graduated with a bachelor's degree and I graduated with my PhD at the same time. So those are things that happen when you don't allow other people to write your narrative and your story for you. Okay, it's just kind of how we can resolve and how you resolve it from kind of a victim standpoint. Heather, go ahead.
Okay, I just want like 30 seconds because I know we need question time. Some of the things that I had thought about that Lisa and I did right. If you're looking for, okay, well, what do I do specifically? Gentle correction and a knowledge that the other person has your best interest at heart, even if they're saying a hard thing. So that comes from a relationship built on trust. You don't get that from a casual acquaintance. If your only exposure to someone of another race is a lady down the hall that you occasionally eat lunch with, you're probably not going to establish that sort of relationship. You have to build a relationship on mutual trust by spending real quality time with somebody. And secondly, for example, when Lisa hears me flippantly use something like dreadlocks to describe someone's hair at work, she educates me in a gentle and loving way because she knows my intention is not to be hurtful and that I just don't know the history there. So she sends me an article, I read the article, and I change my words to reflect my newfound knowledge. And she's not angry at me for having to learn that, and I'm not angry at her for pointing out that my word usage was inappropriate, because we have been able to allow one another to be messy while at the same time holding one another accountable for change once we recognize that mess. And I think that that's been a key for us. So that's all I got.
So Jaquinta, our contact information is on the screen. If anybody wants to email us, you can more than welcome to reach out to us. And again, you just see some pictures that we put up there because we, like I said, we do in fact love each other and spend time together. So we just wanted to share that with you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so I can see everyone else. And if there are questions, Jaquinta, we'll go ahead and move forward with that.
Yes, so we do have some questions here. So I'm going to read them out loud and give you all opportunity to answer. So one of the questions is, so about hair. I am white, but from an interracial family and grew up in a diverse, mostly African-American neighborhood. I've always liked to compliment Black women on their hair as a way of saying, I respect the effort you put into your hair and it's awesome and beautiful. But I've noticed more and more recently, women are taking notice of their hair in a negative way. How can I compliment in a better way?
So I will start with that, and Heather, you feel free to jump in if you would. Keep in mind that oftentimes when people receive a message from you, they have their own internal issues that allow them to process that message. So the person that you're complimenting may have things that they haven't addressed internally, and that causes them to receive your compliment not the way you intended for that compliment to be received. Them not understanding, and whether that comes from previous interactions and engagements that they've had that were negative, or it could just simply come from their own failure to, I guess, acknowledge kind of their hair. It's been a journey for me. I can really and truly say that Black hair and women and their hair is a journey. So I'm 43 years old. So growing up, a relaxer was what we did. And then it kind of has evolved into now natural hair is being accepted. When I was in high school and even college, undergrad, natural hair wasn't accepted the way it is nowadays. So there's a journey. I would encourage you to kind of do some research about that journey that's happened when it comes to the evolution and progression of Black hair. And this is what I often tell Heather, if you're sincerely coming from your heart, that's all you can do. And if people can't receive that, then that's on them. They've got to work through their issues that they have. But if you're sincerely coming from your heart, then that is all you can do. Don't stop complimenting people. Because if you tell me, I'm gonna be like, thanks, girl. Yes, I know. I work my locks.
Okay, another question is, in my job at UK, I'm required to report the race of the people I interact with no ability to ask them their race. I've always been uncomfortable trying to assign a race to people. What suggestions do you have for handling this job requirement?
Get it changed. Oh,
Yeah.
that's that is a conversation that I would definitely have with my higher ups as to why they are forcing you to look at somebody and to determine what their race is. That's not okay. Heather, do you have, because you work there?
I agree with that 100%. I would definitely work to get that changed. And it may not happen immediately, and you may have to continue to do that, but people pushing back against stuff like that is what gets things changed eventually.
Yeah, that's terrible that you have to make those assumptions about people.
Yeah.
Another question is the you people. It keeps othering. I find the phone call a bit puzzling. I'm doing a self-check. I know I make some assumptions, but because I didn't grow up with the same social constructs in the US, it feels slightly different. My assumptions are different, more based on country of origin than anything else, since that is mostly what I do, communicate with people from other countries. But I feel it doesn't happen to me as I've been subject to it, if that makes sense. I think intersectionality is something we don't talk about much, yet it's clear it's a different framework to approach DEI. How are you introducing intersectionality to a group who may be starting on DEI to the basics?
That was a lot.
I was hoping you were going to jump in on that.
So I prefaced our conversation by saying that our conversations were going to be from a Black-white perspective and standpoint. Intersectionality amongst different cultures and different countries is a great discussion that still needs to happen. I don't have a lot of experience or understanding about it, and I don't really want to talk a lot about it. But you started the question by saying that the you people was the problem that the person was having. Did I misunderstand that, Jaquinta, or? Was that what the?
That's kind of what I got as well. It says the you people, it keeps othering. I find the phone call to be a bit puzzling. So yeah, that's how I interpret it as well.
Okay. I can speak to the you people portion of that. I don't have a lot to speak about in the intersectionality. If you want to reach out to me via email after the session, please feel free to do that, and I can try to find some additional research for you. The you people, I try to explain that from the perspective of putting everybody into a box. And particularly, I think about with my students, I'll tell them, I'm not going to put all college students in one box and put all of these indicators and say that they all fit you just because you're in that box. So saying you people is kind of grouping people into a box and making suggestive remarks about them based on how you physically see them, because that's typically all you ever see is the physical appearance, and then you say you people. Does that make sense? Okay. Did we lose Jacinta?
No, I'm here. Sorry.
Okay.
I had some technical difficulties over here. So I have another question. It says they would like to hear the rest of your Facebook story. What should you have said?
Oh, that's good.
What should I have said back to him?
Yes, I
said nothing back to him because, well, one, it hurt my feelings. To be honest, it hurt my feelings, and two, he was so vehemently upset, like curse words, capital letters. In that moment, there was, I don't think, anything that I could have said back. And in full disclosure, my friend took my comment post and put it on his Facebook, and he paraphrased it. So in his paraphrase, a black man paraphrasing it, he used some words that I did not use, like people of color. And this guy really took offense and thought people of color should not be used because you're lumping together Asians and African Americans, and we're not the same. So he had this whole long thing about that, when in reality, I never used people of color. That was the paraphrase from my black friend who put it on his Facebook. So when I talked to this friend later about this, he said, yeah, I didn't know that phrase would cause that type of reaction. So that went back to what Lisa and I had talked about. She said, all black people don't feel that way. All black people don't feel any one way. So you got a person who probably had a history of whatever and reacted that way. And then it was a combination of that paraphrase using some words that he didn't like. And so honestly, I didn't respond at all in that moment because I didn't feel like anything good would come of it. And once my friend rephrased it, once he saw it was a problem, he rephrased and put exactly what I had said. And then this same guy loved that post, and he didn't have anything else to say. So I don't know. I think maybe he realized, wow, I've really overreacted and I let my emotions really show on this person that I don't know. I don't know that. I'm hoping. But in the moment, I did not respond to him because I didn't feel like anything positive would come. Not that I would say something mean. I just didn't think there was anything I could say. And I didn't want to look like I'm defending myself, because I don't think that helps either when you are just in defensive mode. So.